Hello and welcome back to this Library of Ruina series. In this video, we'll be taking on the first phase of the Keter Realization, Wristcutter. Honestly, on my first playthrough, this fight took me multiple weeks to get through, but I found the set of librarians that works well, so let's get started. The librarians are brought to this were purple tier overcharge guard stands with finishing touch, energy discharge, and double hauler, Olivia Singleton featuring duel with Myongest and double hauler, Eileen Blunt and Smokin with fervor, 4 trigrams and city thwack, and the defensive focused Tanya with puppet strings and double defensive power. Really, the main stars are purple tier and Olivier, and I'd recommend against putting Myongest on your purple tier because her rolls are already high enough to be serviceable and you get inflicted with a decent amount of bind, which the strongest can turn into upside. Other good options are anyone with blunt resistance, as all of the boss's attacks are blunt. Before I talk about the boss, it would be remiss of me to not first talk about Angela, who will be assisting you in this fight. Angela has 106 HP, 56 stagger, is blunt injured, and has 6 passives. Speed 3, Facing the Past, which makes you lose if Angela dies. Angela, which makes you unable to attribute passives to her. Director of her role's namesake, which gives her 2 pages at the start of the act and 1 extra light in page every scene. The Seed of Light, which doubles emotion coin gain, and which gives her ego pages every time you clear a phase. Since we start with 0, it's not relevant, but I'll go over them as we get them. Her deck consists of 5 pages. Shyness is a 0 cost, rolling 5 to 8, 5 to 8 block, both dealing 3 stagger damage on Clash Win. It has a 4 to 8 block counter die, its light cost can't be changed, and on use it restores 3 light and draws a page. This is Angela's resource management page, and it's a fantastic one. Unfortunately, on this first phase, it probably won't be seeing much use for reasons that will be explained later. Token of Friendship is a 1 cost, rolling 5 to 10 evade, 4 to 9 blunt that inflicts 2 fragile next scene on hit. Additionally, on use, the ally with the lowest current HP recovers 6 HP and stagger. The evade is very strong, and the effect is nice as well. Lean Bloody Wings is a 2 cost, rolling 5 to 8, 4 to 7, 3 to 7 pierce, with the first 2 pierces inflicting 1 bleed next scene on hit. The cost of the page cannot be changed, and on use, it restores 1 light and draws a page. This page free hits quite well, but the roll range is a little low, especially for this fight. Display of Affection is the page that will be seeing the most use. It's a 3 cost, rolling 8 to 10, 4 to 9 slash, with the first slash destroying the opponent's next die on Clash Win. It has a 3 to 8 slash counter, and on use, all the dice gain 2 power. Rolling 10 to 12 on 1, this page clashes extremely well. Finally, Coffin is a ranged 4 cost, rolling 10 to 15 pierce, 4 to 8, 4 to 8 evade. The pierce also seals the speed dev to target next scene. This is Angela's best page for mass submissions, and it has the strongest one. Now that you're acquainted with Angela's deck, we can move on to the boss, Wristcutter. Wristcutter has 400 HP, 300 stagger, is slash ineffective, pierce damage and blunt damage endured, and has 3 passives. Refracting, which is just fancy shimmering, Scars, which makes them take between 1 and 5 less damage from slash attacks, and Blood, which gives their block dice 3 power. For the first 3 scenes, your assistant librarians won't be present, and it'll instead be Angela solo. On the first scene, Wristcutter will be casting 2 copies of Numbness. This page rolls 4 to 8, 4 to 8 block, both inflicting 1 paralysis next day on Clash Win, and it has a 4 to 8 block counter die. Since there are no offensive dice, I'd recommend just passing without playing anything to avoid getting paralysis. On the second scene, Wristcutter will be casting 1 copy of Numbness and 1 copy of Profound Sorrow, which rolls 7 to 12 blunt, 6 to 8 block. The blunt inflicts 2 bind and paralysis next scene on hit, the block inflicts 1 paralysis next scene on Clash Win, and it has a 5 to 8 block counter. I'd recommend using Coffin as it's quite likely to win. You'll often end up getting 2 paralysis from the evade dice losing, but it's worth it. Alternatively, you could use Display of Affection, but it's a bit more inconsistent. On the third scene, Wristcutter will be casting 3 copies of Pale Hands and 2 copies of Numbness. If you sealed one of Wristcutter's dice, it'll only have 1 copy of Numbness. There are actually 3 different versions of Pale Hands, but on this scene, she'll be casting this one. It rolls 5 to 10, 5 to 8, 4 to 7 blunt, with the first blunt boosting the next die's max value by 3 on Clash Win, the second die lowering the max value of the opponent's next die by 3, and having a 4 to 8 block counter. Note that all versions of Pale Hands will stagger the target if all the attacks connect. Here, it's pretty hard to avoid getting staggered, but it's possible. Use Display of Affection against the highest speed value and Token of Friendship against the next highest value you can. If you get unlucky, it's possible that you can only clash into one of them and you'll probably get staggered, but you shouldn't ever die outright even if you lose every clash. Real quick before moving on, let's talk about the Abnormality pages. Angela will get to emotion level 2 before your other librarians come in, so we get 2 options. I personally take Scars and Urging, but Pale Hands is also okay. I'd avoid taking pulsation, as there will be many cases where your librarians will be unable to use pages for fear of getting staggered, and that's punishment enough. Scars is really the most important one due to you losing if Angela dies, and pseudo 20% damage reduction is good even if they're only blunt and block dice, making the slash portion useless. Anyways, on the 4th scene, your assistant librarians will spawn and Wristcutter will be casting 2 copies of Profound Sorrow on our lower speed values and 3 copies of Indelible Stains of Blood, which rolls 4 to 8 blunt, 4 to 7 block, 4 to 6 blunt. Both of the blunts add a copy of Depression to the target's hand on hit, it adds a copy of Depression to the target's hand on use, and it power nulls just itself. The rolls of this page are pretty easy to beat, but you get a guaranteed Depression, and up to 3 if you roll low. Depression is not good to have, in-game as well. This page is a 3 cost rolling a 1-to-1 evade, and while it's in your librarian's hand, their max stagger is lowered by 34% and they get 1 bind and paralysis each scene, but it exhausts when staggered. Having this on your librarians is pretty bad, but notably, your purple tier eats the paralysis and bind with her guard stance static ability, and your Mrianga's character benefits from the bind, increasing the chance of multiple infinity dice. Theoretically, you should only get 3 copies of Depression per cycle because you win all the clashes though, so let's move on. Most people are fine with this scene. Use pages with a strong 1 to clash into Profound Sorrow such as Jewel or Augury Kick, and reasonably powerful pages with 3 dice to clash into Indelible Stains of Blood such as Overcharge, Display of Affection, Emotional Turbulence, or Jewel. Ideally, you use your Mrianga's die to clash with pages with lower clashing power such as Will of the Prescript or Friar Dragon Slash to conserve resources. I'd avoid free hitting this scene, as although there are only 2 block counters, you don't have the light or dice economy to expend clashing pages to beat them. The next scene is where it falls apart for most people. Wristcutter will be casting 5 copies of Pale Hands, 2 copies of the previous one, 2 copies of this one, which rolls 7 to 10, 6 to 8, 3 to 8 blunt, with the first blunt destroying the opponent's next die on clash win with a 4 to 8 block counter, and 1 copy of this one that rolls 5 to 7, 9 to 15, 4 to 9 blunt, with the second die inflicting 2 paralysis next in on hit with a 4 to 8 block counter. For the one that messes with max values, since it's the weakest by default, you can use pages that are a little weaker like Overcharge or Single Empowered Emotional Turbulence. For the one that destroys dice, having a strong 1 is the most important, as it's fine if you take a hit or 2 as long as you don't eat the entire page, so use pages like Jewel, Augury Kick, or your Mrianga's die. For the one that inflicts paralysis, your best option by far is to use Display of Affection, so I'd always make sure to have a copy in hand for this scene. I'd also avoid free hitting in this scene for the same reason as before. The exceptions are if you don't have a powerful 3 dice page in hand, most commonly not having an overcharge on your purple tier after expending 2 of them, forcing you to use a leap, or if you need to use a power booster for your next scene. If you end up doing this though, expect to take around 7 stagger damage per die and calculate your stagger resistance numbers accordingly. On the next scene, Wristcutter will be casting 2 copies of 2 different versions of Self-Loathing in a mass attack Sinking. This mass attack rolls 25 to 25 blunt and on hit purges strength, endurance, protection, and stagger protection from the target, as well as adding a copy of Depression to their hand. 25 to 25 doesn't sound like a really large amount, but I somehow always have 4 librarians losing it. Anyways, use your strongest pages here. For me, that's Coffin on Angela, True Dragon Formation on Olivier, Overcharge on Purple Tier, Jewel on Tanya, and Ever Spinning Gear Wheel on Eileen. Now we can talk about the Self-Loathing pages. These are both counter-only pages, with one rolling 6 to 8, 6 to 8, 5 to 8 block, all dealing 5 stagger damage to self on Clash Lose, and on combat start, if Angela's the target, deals 10 damage to her and recovers 20 HP. The other one rolls 5 to 8, 5 to 8, 5 to 7 blunt, all dealing 5 stagger damage to the target on hit, and it has the same combat start text. Obviously, you should redirect these away from Angela. On this scene, I'd recommend free hitting when possible. If you have double Mrianga's dice, then you can eat a ton of the counter dice with the 5 power that it brings. Leave your less powerful dice to the end so they're more likely to free hit, and otherwise prepare for the next scene by continuing to stack strength. After the mass attack scene, the cycle will repeat, but if you remember, on the first scene after you get your assistant librarians, Wristcutter only had 2 counter dice. Well, if you sealed 1 for dice with Coffin last scene, she'll only have 1 counter die, which will get snuffed by a Mrianga's die. At this stage, it might be worth it to exclusively free hit to try and force a stagger. I found that I can consistently do it without getting hit at 50 or less stagger, and you can probably do it at 100 or so stagger if none of your librarians are staggered themselves. You may need to do a bit of clash manipulation to get pages away from librarians about the stagger, but other than that, you should be able to win fairly consistently on this scene or the next scene. Once you've beaten Wristcutter, all of your librarians will get revived and fully healed, and you'll get a checkpoint so you can adjust your decks and pages need be. I'll probably post a live play in the description of the videos as they come out, as these fights are quite challenging. In the next video, I'll be covering the next phase of the fight, Aspiration. I'll see you soon, and as always, thank you for watching.